Welcome back to the Grey Havens, and in this video, we are going to talk about why the elves in The Lord of the Rings had to leave Middle-earth. It's a major plot point in the last few episodes of Amazon's Rings of Power, and I personally think they handled this part of the story rather well. The elves sailing away to Valinor is also an extremely moving scene at the very end of Peter Jackson's trilogy. But what if I told you that it's also the reason why the Rings of Power and Sauron's ring were originally created in the first place? In fact, if you dig a little deeper, the departure of the elves is actually the primary theme underneath the entire Lord of the Rings books. But alright, let's get back to the main question. Why did they have to leave? And where were they even going? It's clear that they don't want to go, so what's really going on here? Well, in this video, we're going to try and answer all of your questions about why the elves in The Lord of the Rings had to leave Middle-earth. Okay, let's dive in. I think it's best if we start with some of the basics of the geography and history surrounding Middle-earth. At this point in time, the world was divided into three large continents. The eternal gods of the earth, the Valar, they lived in the continent to the west, which we often call Valinor, or the Undying Lands. While the evil god, Morgoth, he lived in the center continent, simply referred to as Middle-earth. Morgoth is the one who essentially is responsible for bringing evil into the world. He's the original big bad guy in Tolkien's Legendarium. Now, these two continents really could not be more different from one another. In Valinor, the gods had created a timeless paradise. There was virtually no death, and the land was blessed and sacred. It's a perfected earth, the way the world was meant to be. In Middle-earth, however, Morgoth is there creating disease, monsters, and dragons. There is strife and war and famine and death. When the elves first awoke in the world, they were found by the Valar and taken to live in Valinor. There they learned much from the gods, who were essentially like their parents. As such, elves tend to be more noble and good, but men on the other hand, well, not so lucky. When humans awoke, it was Morgoth that found us first, and in the darkness we worshipped him as a terrible god of fire and death. As such, men were corrupted from the very start and tend to be, well, more easily led astray. Now eventually, Morgoth was defeated and cast down, but his stains could never truly be washed away from Middle-earth. It was forever tarnished. I guess the main point is that while men in Middle-earth had been forever corrupted and marred by the influence of Morgoth, the elves, well, they had it made, living happily in timeless Valinor, isolated and immune to the troubles of the rest of the world. During the First Age, Morgoth committed a terrible evil on the Noldor elves. They were so enraged that they left Valinor and traveled to Middle-earth to wage war on Morgoth. For centuries upon centuries they fought. Eventually, after many battles and many losses, Morgoth was defeated, and at last the elves had won a hard-fought peace. If you're interested in stories of this long war, and you should be, because it's awesome, check out the Silmarillion. This is one of the main storylines. Anyway, in the aftermath of these epic wars, the elves created great kingdoms such as Ilmadris and Eregion and Lothlorien, and they labored to repair all the damages that war had wrought on the lands that they loved. After centuries of hard sacrifice, you see, they could finally set back and relax and enjoy the lives that they had created for themselves in Middle-earth. But there was one problem. Even though Morgoth was defeated, his influence forever upset the natural balance of things. Middle-earth slowly fades over time. It becomes less special, less vibrant, more gray, and more dull. As men with our short lifespans, we don't really perceive it fully, but we still notice the loss of forests and nature, and clean waters and quieter earth. But to the eternal elves, it's incredibly noticeable and quite depressing. They observed this degradation, this fading, until eventually the whole of Middle Earth would become dreary and wearisome. Not only that, but this can also affect their own bodies. While the spirits of the elves burn bright for the entire age of the earth, while in Middle Earth, their bodies can start to fade. You see, they are eating food tarnished by the sins of Morgoth. They breathe the corrupted airs and drink the corrupted waters. They're bringing the corruption inside of them. Middle Earth was quite literally killing them. The fundamental problem was time. Time was the challenge that the elves faced. Time ever marched on in Middle Earth, fading both the world around them and their own bodies. Only in the timeless lands of Valinor could they truly find healing. Sooner or later, they would have to leave Middle Earth, and once they went home, they were forbidden to ever return. You see, the elves had a great dilemma. On one hand, the world of Middle Earth is tainted and unsuitable for them. It's kind of poison, really. On the other hand, they had fought long and hard to be here, and didn't want to leave just when peace was finally possible. This was the great challenge of their time. And this is what they're really discussing in the Rings of Power show when Gil-galad speaks to Elrond about the great tree that is dying. The tree is a symbolic image of what's happening to the elves, to their bodies. They have just realized that Middle-earth is killing them, and they are fading away with it, and they are in real peril. Now this process is actually pretty slow, and I suspect in the show that we're going to find out in Season 2 that Sauron is tricking them into thinking it's more of an immediate trauma than it truly is. After all, Sauron did tell Galadriel in Numenor that the best way to influence others is to find out what they are most afraid of and give them a solution for it. Leaving Middle-earth is what the elves are most afraid of, and I think he is tricking them into finding a solution. But lies or no lies, there still remains a fundamental truth here. The marches of time in Middle-earth is killing the elves. Wow. Now if only there was a way to somehow stop the flow of time. This is the challenge that the Rings of Power were created to overcome, to stop the marches of time. And in the end, I think you'll see that this is also why the elves ultimately had to leave Middle-earth. When warned by the elves, the Rings of Power could slow down time, almost to a halt, in the lands surrounding the three ring-bearers. Seasons continue to come and go, and the moon still goes through its phases, yeah, sure. But the lands around them are unchanged by the passage of time. Those epic rings preserve the world around them, prevent it from diminishing or fading. All things remain fresh and vibrant and young, and resists the decays of time. They allowed the elves to stay here. That was the purpose of the rings, to delay the fading of the world around them and their bodies, so that they could continue to live in Middle-earth. But no solution is perfect, and there was definitely a problem with the three rings, and a pretty big problem at that. You see, they were all of them deceived. They didn't know it at the time, but it was Sauron that had given them the knowledge on how to make these rings, and they were essentially powered by the life force of Sauron himself. This is what made the War of the Rings so sad for the elves. If Sauron won, he would conquer all of Middle-earth, and they would have no choice but to leave and go back home to Valinor. But if Sauron lost, well, then he would be destroyed, and the Rings of Power would stop working. Their lands and their bodies would fade and diminish, and they would have no choice but to leave and go back home to Valinor. No matter the outcome, the end result would be a melancholy one for the elves. In the end, this is why the elves had to leave Middle-earth. Once Frodo and Sam destroyed the One Ring and Sauron was thrown down, the Rings of Power lost their time-stopping abilities. The lands around the elves faded and turned to gray. The elves could no longer survive in Middle-earth. Within 100 years or so after the fall of Sauron, all of the Noldor elves left Middle-earth and returned back home to timeless Valinor.